Welcome to This Birding Life, a podcast for birdwatchers everywhere. I'm your host, Bill Thompson III. For more than a decade, we've made our podcasty little home in the Big Birdhouse, also known as Birdwatchers Digest, the magazine for birders who love to read and readers who love to bird. If you aren't a regular reader of Birdwatchers Digest, you're just not living your birding life to the fullest. Treat your eyeballs and enrich your mind at birdwatchersdigest-digital.com. Special thanks to our longtime sponsor, Carl Zeiss Sports Optics, makers of the Victory SF binocular and the Gavia spotting scope, both designed specifically for birding. Join the Zeiss community of birders at facebook.com/ZeissBirding. A can't-miss birding event is happening this September in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's the American Birding Expo, featuring more than 100 exhibitors offering all sorts of products, experiences, destinations, and so on to enhance your birding. That's why we call it the world of birding in one place. Come find out why September 29 to October 1, 2017. Buy your tickets at birdingexpo.com. Finally, we welcome our newest This Birding Life sponsor, Quark Expeditions, the leader in polar adventures. Quark Expeditions has partnered with Noah Stricker for a brand new birding expedition sailing from South Georgia to Cape Verde. Noah will act as field guide and onboard lecturer as passengers explore some of the world's most remote islands in search of rare and endemic birds. Learn more at quarkexpeditions.com. Now on to our episode. This is episode 70, Ian Harding and Odd Birds. Imagine being a bird so famous and rare and sought after that every time you appear anywhere, people scream and go totally nuts. That's what it's like for Ian Harding, an actor who became world famous for his portrayal of Ezra Fitz on the long-running television show Pretty Little Liars. If you're not familiar with Pretty Little Liars, it's an American teen drama mystery thriller television show. It's a series loosely based on the popular book series of the same name. Millions of people all over the world tuned in to watch Ian and his castmates during the show's 7-year run, catapulting the young actor into the rarefied air of Hollywood fame. Over the years, Ian has attracted millions of followers on social media, filled his mantle with 17 Choice Award trophies, and he's kept himself grounded through it all by going birding. That's right, he's both a teen idol and an avid birder. Now he's written a book about his life to this point. He's just 30 years old. It's called Odd Birds. We recently connected via Skype to talk about the new book and his love of birds. Let's start off this episode by hearing Ian read a short passage from his new book.
Bridge to Nowhere. The day had been sweltering. I spent the last few hours trying to avoid the heat, but as I stood in the river, the icy cold water rushing around my ankles, I began to shiver. I looked up and down the river. I couldn't find the bird. A blur tracked across my peripheral vision. I turned to see where it went. Large boulders interrupted the river in places, and looking out over the water, I couldn't see where the bird had landed. It had been only a shadow of emotion, a flash of gray. Where the hell had it gone? Maybe it had landed just out of sight, I figured, so I began to slog through the river, periodically glancing upstream to see if it had landed on any of the boulders sticking out of the water. Birdless, every last one of them. Maybe the bird had flown farther upstream than I had realized, and here I was, standing in a river, my teeth chattering, just a bit overeager to find it. I looked out at the river again and tried to take it all in. White riffles coursing around large boulders. The water was fast-moving and clear where it had room to flow. A trout rose to the surface of a pool below one of the rocks. There it was again, the flash of gray. As I turned to look, the movement congealed into the form of a small bird, its tail bobbing rhythmically as it perched out on a boulder in the middle of the water. It turned back and forth, looking upstream and down, as if trying to make up its mind where to go. The bird hop-flew to the next rock downstream, toward me, and continued to bob its tail. It blinked. I saw it blink, its white eyelids popping against its slate-gray body. An American dipper. This was a good bird. I'd gotten a late start that morning. It was a Saturday in August, and I was driving out of Los Angeles, the city I call home. I was going up to the mountains to go hiking and birding by myself, then I had plans to meet up with friends to camp for the night. I turned the AC up to full blast as I drove. It was a stupefyingly hot day in the Southland. I've been in LA for just under a decade now, and I love it here. An ocean to the west, mountains to the north. The city stretches east and south, and the mass of humanity here seems more or less continuous all the way down to San Diego. There's a lot to do close by. You can surf in the morning in Santa Monica, and then drive 2 hours to spend the afternoon skiing at Big Bear. Los Angeles County is huge, substantially larger than the city itself. It stretches far north over the Angeles National Forest and the San Gabriel Mountains, encompassing Antelope Valley, which blooms orange with California poppies in the spring, the eastern corner of the Los Padres National Forest, and the western corner of the Mojave Desert. Despite the urban sprawl across large parts of the county, which is home to over 10 million people, even larger swaths are covered in oak woodland, pine and fir forest, and desert, and there's 70 miles of coastline. Because of the diversity of habitat, you can see more species of birds in Los Angeles County than almost anywhere else in the United States. A little more than an hour on the road, I exited the 210 at Azusa. I was on my way to the Angeles National Forest, which includes the mountain range to the northeast of the city. A few turns put me on the 39, heading north into the park. As the highway switchbacked up off the valley floor, I started to think about my plan for the weekend. Today, I was looking forward to getting outdoors, roughing it for the night. In the morning, I would wake up early to drive back to Los Angeles. A stylist was coming over to my house in the mid-afternoon to make me look presentable, because tomorrow night, I was attending the Teen Choice Awards. For the past 7 years, I've played a high school English teacher named Ezra Fitz on a TV show called Pretty Little Liars. It was a gig I was fortunate enough to land right out of college. Right now, I'm finishing up filming on the last season of PLL. It's 7th. As I drove, I thought back to an idea I'd had for a while. 3 seasons back, my character on the show wrote a book, and I've been thinking about writing one myself ever since. What you're listening to now is the result of that crazy idea. This book isn't a chronological memoir. I'm too young to write something like that anyway. Instead, it's a collection of stories and thoughts I've had about my life in Hollywood and my life outdoors, and a few things I've only recently been able to put words to. I want to look back on my experiences so far and talk about a few of them. About my childhood, about my life as an actor, and about some of the things I find meaningful. And yes, birds. A lot about birds. Because they mean a lot to me, and they keep cropping up in my life.
Welcome to the realm of people who've written books. It's a wonderful experience. I'm not sure it measures up to having done 7 years of an amazingly popular TV show, but it's still something special that nobody can take away from you. And I want to congratulate you on a really, really well-written book. I mean, it's I deal with content all the time, and I was very engaged, even though, you know, it wasn't straight up bird book or straight up sort of novel or autobiography. It was very compelling, and I thought it never lost my attention, which is saying something.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm very flattered by that.
Yeah, I mean, so what made you want to write the book?
You know, I started to, you know, you mentioned a second ago being on a television show for 7 years, and that is a, you know, it's both a blessing and I can't even say a blessing and a curse, because it's mostly a blessing,
right,
and with like just a dash of, you know, a curse in it, because I wanted to do other things and I couldn't really, because the schedule of filming was so heavy.
Right.
I was sort of locked in, and I wanted to. I'd always sort of written on my own, and for you know, I mean, quite frankly, I've done a few things in college, and then my friends, my college friends, and we had these long email chains that are just like, we'll write, you know, pages and pages to each other just to make each other laugh. And so I had done that, and I figured, you know what, this is a challenge. Why don't I go and
right,
and try and accomplish this? And you know, I feel good about doing it. It took some serious time, but that is also one of the great things about being an actor is you may have a week where you're shooting every day for 12 hours,
right,
and then the very next week I'm not in that episode, right. So I have, you know, 7 days to crank out everything that I can.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a wonderful experience, and I'm happy to have completed it.
Yeah, it's a good book. So, how did you first get tuned into birds? I mean, it's in the book a little bit, but I'd like to have you tell our listeners what flipped the switch for you in your first encounter with birds when you were a kid.
Yeah, I wish I have a couple of moments, but it was one of these things where my dad was really, it was both my parents really, but my dad was really influential in getting me outside, and I grew up in sort of suburban bordering on rural Virginia.
Okay.
And so he was very good at, like, all right, let's go out. We got to get out of the house. You're like destroying it. So we need to go. And, some kids get into, the mammals or like salamanders or something like that. And that's great. But I just happen to get into that. Also because my family has that sort of odd folklore with cardinals. And so I think maybe I
Right.
was a little bit more attentive to it. And then I remember always being sort of a lover of animals. And I do remember one specific moment where I was able to discern that one of these things was not like the other, and that was
Yeah.
exciting, which was I hung all these bottles in my backyard and filled them with bird seed, and we got the usual backyard birds, and I was looking at them one day, and then I just see this thing come and land, and it seemed to have, like, it was small, but had sort of like what looked like a slightly larger head than the rest of the birds, and it had this slight little red flame on the top. And I realized it was a ruby-crowned kinglet,
Nice.
and but I didn't know that. So I go in my Audubon book and I look it up, and I found it. And I'm like, oh my gosh! Like, I just get so excited by it. And then of course you feel that slight embarrassment, because it's like, why you're getting that excited about a bird, but it really stuck with me. And then from there I would go and see what I could find. And then of course, as you approach middle school and high school,
Right.
you start to kind of put it aside, and it wasn't until I was an adult and really stopped caring about what people thought. And in fact, I feel like I'm answering like 9 questions at
That's
once,
okay.
but I thought, I realized that getting back into birding was essential for me, because I was slightly getting wrapped up. Despite my best efforts, I was getting wrapped up in this sort of Hollywood mindset of what's
Mm-hmm.
next and what do I look like, and what, all of the things that I tried to get away from. You can't help but be sort of inundated
Right.
with that mentality, and having something that is so outside, like, the actor's norm.
Right.
It was something that was my own. It was something that instilled wonder again, and got me to focus on something else. And I think as a result, sort of saved me from going down that sort of stereotypical, actor route, of just like bitterness and anger for no reason, because you're living such a wonderful life that people would kill for. So I hope that answers your
It
question
does. It
from
does.
20 minutes ago.
And it kind of leads us to, you alluded to the folklore that your family had. Can you describe that
Yeah.
a little bit for our listeners? I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. So my mother's side of the family has had this thing with cardinals for a very long time, because my grandfather and grandmother were I guess, like, great grandmother on that side too, were also sort of amateur
Mm-hmm.
naturalists. They would go for walks, and instead of just sort of going for a walk and clearing their head, they would find, like, oh, what's this leaf? Look at this bird. Look at this feather that we found. And that sort of went to my grandfather, who loved cardinals. He just thought they were the best thing. Like, he'd be barbecuing something in the backyard in the spring and summer in Virginia, and he would just see them, and he would just look at them, and like the burgers would start to burn, and he would just be looking at them for so long. And so I think, especially because my grandfather died when I was pretty young, I think one of the ways my mother sort of helped me either cope with that or just sort of see life and death differently was saying that it's it's great. He's come back in bird form.
Right.
I'm not saying that he was reincarnated as this bird and he's nowhere else. Like, he's so because I've seen a few dead cardinals on the road, and of course, like
It's not Grandpa, right?
thankfully that was not super dramatic, yeah. But it was just something that was sort of a nice reminder, and it's really stuck with me. It's literally saved my life in a couple of moments, just where I was almost hit by that truck on my way up to college, but
right.
it's just something that sort of evolved, and now it's sort of a family joke,
Yeah.
but a deep inside joke.
Yeah, and that leads to the whole thing about birds as being like, we don't give birds enough credit for being sentient beings, and there's
Right.
we've been taught in science classes and by society that don't anthropomorphize. Birds are not little
Right.
people. Animals are not like us. But there's a kind of a growing school of thought that that's not really true. That in fact,
Right.
maybe birds have way deeper emotions and connections to the universe that we're barely able to understand.
Yeah, truly. It's hard to say that they don't have personalities, because I think that animals have personalities. I guess it's people start to split hairs when you get into the idea that how much suffering or self-consciousness can an animal have. But you can definitely see that there's a different personality. In fact, I think that's what helps birders ID different birds is seeing in some way different personality. I mean, there are tons and tons of black phoebes out in California, and when I saw this painted redstart, at first glance, from a distance, you could say, oh, it's a black phoebe, but you see the way that it moves and calls and up and down the tree, and instantly you can recognize a different personality. I mean, we could get into the whole argument of like, well, is it a personality, or is it just searching for food? Is it just mere behavior? But I think there is something to be said about animal personality, and these sort of you never want to say the phrase spiritual, but
Well, I don't know.
bordering on that.
Yeah. I have lots of friends who feel that birds are bringing them messages from, like in your case, people who've passed on. My wife feels that every
Right.
red-tailed hawk she sees is her dad sending her a message, and it always seems to connect at a time in her life when it's something big is happening, and she would need
Right.
him at that moment. So I think it's kind of fascinating stuff.
If anything, it's just something that, like when I go out birding, it makes me very present, and it makes me very conscious of my surroundings, and especially this day and age where you are, I mean, it feels as though the world is out there to separate you from the present, even take a moment, regardless of what people believe, whether they think that red-tailed hawk is actually that person, or they see that red-tailed hawk is just in the sky right now, and it lets them focus on something else. They say, oh, this whole day I've been, out of my mind thinking about the bills, thinking about my job that I hate, or thinking about, and just taking a moment and realizing that you're alive and being grateful. I mean, it's magical in that sense.
Right.
I mean, I don't think you need to believe in, past lives or anything like that to appreciate the goodness that can come from it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that can enrich your life no matter where you are, no matter where you are in your life. And that's what I love. That's what draws me to it for sure. So while we're on the subject of death, because hey,
Right, yeah.
you've done some of your, you alluded to doing some of your best birding during the when you were filming Pretty Little Liars in the cemetery that's right across from the
totally.
lot there. What's your best cemetery bird?
Best cemetery bird. Oh man. I spotted what was the red-winged blackbird, but it was the
Tricolored blackbird?
it might have just been the tribe, but it looked like, I forget the phrase of it, where it's not albino per se,
Oh yeah,
but
leucistic.
yes, that's it. Because I was thinking like, oh, okay, so that's red-winged blackbird, but that's not a female. And then it flew off, and I was like, huh. which is interesting. I mean, if you think about it, we're in a cemetery and you have like a very ghost-like, version of the bird. I think that was one where you said leucistic?
Yeah, leucistic. Some people say leucistic, but like there's no such
Yeah,
thing as partial albino. You're either an albino or you're not. So leucism
yeah,
is where there's a problem with some pigment, and so part of you is
yeah,
white, and it can be caused by a DNA abnormality. It can be caused by an injury or a dietary problem in the egg, or in
yeah,
the as a fledgling. So it's it's
yeah.
common, like with birds that are colonial nesters, like house sparrows, for example, or birds that nest
Really?
in loose colonies, like backyard robins. You see a lot of genetic sort of mixing and matching, and you'll have a robin with a white head, or an all white house
Yeah.
sparrow. So,
Okay. Because I'd just seen, I think the only reason I was sort of in tune with that was I had come back from a visit to Seattle, and I had gone out to Vashon
oh,
Island,
nice.
and we had seen a leucistic raven,
Oh,
and which was very eerie because it was
that's,
right as we
yeah.
were leaving.
I'd buy a lottery ticket
You
that
know,
day, man.
yeah, I didn't. That's a good thought because it was also like a very smoky, gray, rainy Seattle morning, and it was and he was just sitting on that pole,
Wow.
and it was I mean it was very. I'll have to send you a picture. It was very eerie,
Yeah, well,
but
so better view desired birds. That you talked about your condor escapade, and you feel that you saw one, but you put
yes,
BVD next to it. It's better view desired. Have you gotten that better view desired yet?
I'm not. I have. I kind of tried. I mean, I guess I went up to oh gosh, what is there's um a mountain. A mountain is a loose term in this, I guess, foothill really in California near Pyramid Lake that they're often sighted at, and I went up there a while ago with my buddy Walter, and we
Yeah.
still couldn't find them. And it's weird, especially for a bird that is roughly the size of a small plane. You think that they would be like easily spotted, but no, no luck. The bird that I've been searching for a lot recently was the I was a northern parula. Like
Yeah.
I had heard them, and I could have sworn that like I would see the small shape just in the very upper canopy when I was
Right. They're tree
back east.
toppers.
They're all always there, but I couldn't get like a good spot. And no joke, I'm walking through the sort of housing development that my mom lives in. We're walking around, and I hear that pretty familiar call where it goes up and then sort of plateaus, and it's right by my head, and I just look up, and it's just in this tree, maybe 8 feet from, and it's one of those things that it's the trees that are in like medians, like
Right.
not a
Right.
forest at all, like nothing.
Right.
And I like my mom was mid conversation about something pretty important, and I just walked away from her, and I was like, "Oh my God, there it is! Yes!" And she was like, "You really need to get a life in." But no,
Yeah.
I think she's more offended than disdainful of my hobby. But but yeah, I forget where I was going with that. Something about cemetery.
Yeah, well, we're all over the place. So one of the other cool stories that I learned from your book, and I'd never heard this, even though I'm a big fan of condors and I'm a big fan of Johnny Cash, is
Right.
his connection to California condors. Can you relate that to?
Yes. So the whole thing was that Johnny Cash owned a ranch in sort of central California years and years ago, and he decided one night to take a party bus because he liked to live large, as one could assume. He took his party bus out to a spot in what was right near National Forest, and the bus overheated and started a fire that burned acres and acres and acres. And in that, I'm blanking on the exact national forest, but in that moment, there was something like 52 condors, and he and he was essentially responsible for the demise of 40 something of them. It was
Oh my
it was
God.
bad, and then of course being the consummate rebel, he when asked about it, he said something to the judge like, I don't care about your damn dirty buzzards, which is
Yeah, I don't care about your yellow buzzards.
yeah.
Yeah, good old Johnny. That gives the song "Ring of Fire" a whole new meaning.
Right, yes it does. There were so many puns that I was like, what do I play with here? Because
Right.
that would be
Oh
marvelous.
my God.
Yeah, I've never seen one, and the irony is that we could go to Arizona if we wanted to,
Yeah.
and they're pretty prevalent there, and have yet to see them.
Yeah, tons of tourists at the Grand Canyon every day looking, hey, what's that big bird with the tags on its wings?
Yes.
That's the place to go if you want to get them. So I wanted to ask you about the movie The Big Year. You must get
Yes.
asked by that way more than even those of us out here in the rest of the world get asked
Right.
about that.
Yeah.
You saw it, I take it.
I saw the first probably 30, 40 minutes of it. I actually I hadn't seen it prior to having a conversation with Ken Kaufman, and he also kind of brought it up, this whole thing of like Hollywood and birding, and how
Hmm.
sometimes you get it wrong, and or how Hollywood gets it wrong rather. And I brought up The Big Year because I hadn't seen it, and again, as you mentioned, it's sort of a touch point to between Hollywood and birds. And so when I finally watched it, I was watching it on an airplane, and a phrase that he said came to my mind, which was what Hollywood kind of got wrong was this idea of like the intense competitiveness between birders.
Yeah.
And Ken said, I've never experienced that, and I personally have never. I've experienced the exact opposite, where I will
Mhm.
be out and I'll see somebody with binoculars, and they'll notice that I have binoculars, and I've had people come up to me and say like, all right, so listen, guys, over here, if you're going to go down to the end of the trail, you're going to hang a right. There is a blah 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 down at the end of the
Right.
street.
Right.
I've had, yeah, and all this. It's like, what is the reason for competition? Have you ever experienced that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are birding competitions, and I've been in them before, big days, and I've never done a big year, but I do the big sit every year where you're kind of competing against your last year's number. But I've also done birding competitions in several different countries or several different states here in the U.S. It's fun,
Yeah,
but it's not cutthroat. I mean, you're not slashing anybody's tires and calling the cops on them and calling their
right.
hotel room at 4 in the morning. But I thought my take on the big year was, and I get asked about it tons, but
Right,
the UPS guy and the
yeah.
checkout person at the grocery store. Oh, you're a bird watcher. Hey, I saw that movie. What was it called? The Big
The
Year.
Big Year.
Um,
Yeah,
I just thought with that comedic cast and the amazing actors that were in it, I just thought, wow, this is going to be a knockout. And I took the whole Birdwatchers Digest staff down to see it. And we all watched it. And of course, the non-birders on our staff were like, that was really cool. Jack Black was in it, and Steve Martin.
yeah,
And I was kind of like, man, with what they had, it could have been so much more amazing and wonderful. I appreciated the fact that they didn't go for the old lady in tennis shoes or
Right.
the professor in the pith helmet kind of joke. I appreciated that, and I thought a lot of the aspects of being driven to see birds were captured pretty authentically there.
yeah.
But I just thought as a movie it was it was okay. It was
Right.
It was good. It was fun to see a movie on birding, and it really has given non-birders a touch point, as you said. And I did an interview with the director
Yeah.
of it for this podcast years ago, and he said, boy, a lot of the stuff that was in the original script got cut out. Everybody's people had their say over this and over that and eventually, like I said, it was like too many sprinkles in the ice cream.
Right. Yeah, and I should go back and finish it, and I'll feel that pressure that sometimes if you know that something could be good press, let's say for the birding community, but either it's not entirely accurate or it's not like I wonder what is it good to just, go out there and support it, even though maybe you have your own issues with it? Because I'm all about like, yeah, sure, get kids and not even kids, people from all walks of life outside and
Right.
put specs in their hand. But like for instance, I have friends that there were, thankfully are not anymore because it was a bit of a flash in the pan, but were really into Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
And I said, what's like that except not as crappy, and people aren't like setting you up to rob you? Birding. I mean, of course there is like really dangerous birding. Like I heard of a guy who snuck into North Korea to see a woodpecker that's endemic to that area. Like that.
Oh yeah.
That's when I kind of draw the line. Like I'm like, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm not going to go get killed over this. But like I have eBird. I have other notifications. I check a Yahoo site that's just for LA birds, and I will go out when there are certain things that are spotted, and that feels like Pokemon Go, But I'm not like rushing outside to stand in the middle of the street for like a Charizard or something that doesn't,
Right.
Well,
the funny point, I wrote a book called The Young Birder's Guide years ago, and I did it because it was the book I really wanted to have when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I worked with my daughter's 4th and 5th grade class to produce it, and it was so much fun. And I realized in doing that when I was quizzing her classmates, like I'd show an image on the screen, and it would be a Charizard, and all the kids would go Charizard.
Yeah.
And then I'd show, basically the bird that's based on, or there's one that looks just like a Quetzal.
Yeah.
There's one that looks like a bluebird.
Yes.
The kids knew every single Pokemon, and I said, you guys, birding is the same thing. Like on the back of the card, what its power points are and those are field marks. It's the same thing, but it's real.
Right. Except you can go out and find these things, and then not to mention, I think there is something that's missing when it comes to, Pokemon Go is half the fun for me for going out and doing any sort of birding is you get to go and see a landscape and take it in, I think, a bit more attentively than you would otherwise. Like if you like I was in Portland, Oregon years ago, and that's a really cool town, and you can go and you enjoy the beer and you have fun with friends, and that's half the experience. And then you go and you get to be outside, as opposed to, for me, whenever I travel anywhere, birding sort of is part of the pie that's of the whole experience. Yeah. Because you take in the actual, environment, whatever environment you happen to be in. It's a good old time, as I like to say.
Good old time.
Yeah.
Hey, so your buddy Walter, who's the guy that was there when you saw the merganser and got fired up about it, and so he's your birding pal, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but he still doesn't believe that you saw the painted redstart.
So after the book came out, he sent me a post from a site, a full web forum that he follows, that said, something like 2 spotted in the Southern California area. And so, I mean, he thinks I think now he does it just to mess with me, because that's kind of people we are. We like mess with each other about what birds we've seen. But I think he finally understood, because, he really is. He is like a master at it, but is also at the same time has the humility that he will still refer to guides. He doesn't like make an immediate judgment. He still very much loves it. Even though he can tell the difference between, like for instance, I was just up in the Sierras, and I saw what was a white crown sparrow, I believe, but it was the taiga morph. It was the one that's slightly like a little bit more. Just the white is it's so pronounced. It's just a different
glowing. Yeah.
You were able to tell the difference between that. So he's one of those guys that would immediately know that, whereas I had to kind of go. But I did
check the book.
I did text him a couple of things. He was down in Texas, and he was, he was texting me about this zone-tailed hawk that this mating pair that lives on his grandparents' property, and I was, and kept texting me about it to harass me, and to like taunt me. And after a while, the texts got a little bit vulgar.
Well, you got to birding smack talk is a real thing,
Yeah.
you gotta thumb your nose at people that don't have the bird that you're getting right there. That's always a good thing. But you also talk about your friend John, who was the reluctant,
Yes.
third person to go along with you on some of your birding outings. And what is it about non-birders or brand new birders that you think makes them such great spotters? Like, boom, you and your friend are way more experienced and way more into it and trying hard, and he's just like, hey, there it is right there.
For me, as you get more experience, you start to maybe zero in on what you want to find, as opposed to taking in the entire space. For instance, we actually, the three of us went down to Bologna Marsh, or Bologna Wetlands, however, whichever one you want to call it, out here in Los Angeles. And it's right by the airport. It's one of my favorite places to go, because especially during, the spring and everything, you can go and see a lot, because it's really the wettest, marshiest spot for miles. And so, my buddy Walter and I, we were intent on going and finding this Sora that had been spotted there. And so we're busy like looking down at the ground, and John is sort of like kicking rocks and mumbling things to himself. I mean, he really is like that. Like he's sort of savantish in some ways. He's an eccentric that has a huge mop of black curly hair, and just will go on these riffs about he could talk about like a fence and make it funny and make it genius. He's really brilliant like that. But he said, so guys, what's this thing? And he had also started, we were like, John, don't worry about it, because he kept on pointing to like what was obviously like a pigeon. And like, John, stop. Like we're seriously, we're looking for this thing. Like just play it cool. And he said something like, do pigeons look like that? Like, do they often have yellow faces? We're like, what are you talking about, John? And we turn, and it was this Townsend's warbler just sitting on this fence post. And we had neglected to see it because we were so intent at looking at the marshland floor, like just scanning for that Sora. And he was just able to take in all of his surroundings, and he saw this thing that I had never seen before, and then of course he held that up against us for a while. But we owed him some pastries afterwards. That's
Well, one day he'll get his spark bird, and that'll be it. Then the race will be on at that point.
Yes. Yeah.
So, if you could be instantly transformed into any bird, what do you think you would like to be?
I was actually thinking about that because I did one of these. I was at a party, and somebody had discovered this site called like Primal Astrology, which of course, whether or not you believe in any of that, it was just a bunch of people that had several beers, and they're like, "Oh, what animal am I?" And some people are offended. So actually, John got an earthworm. My buddy John, who we just talked about, he's apparently an earthworm. I'm a narwhal, which I thought was hilarious, but
sure.
I was hoping for something with feathers, but alas, that was not the case. But I think I think a lot about the red-tailed hawks, just how how adaptable they are, how different they can be, and yet still be the same species.
What was the name of your red-tailed hawk when you were a kid?
Mr. Hawkins. Really clever.
Mr. Hawkins, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I think about that, or I do love American kestrels, and I wish that there was like a really, and I'm sure you get this too when somebody asks you what's your favorite bird. It could be because you could say something because, oh, I remember where I was when I saw it, and that was a really beautiful setting, or I was with my girlfriend at the time or something, and we had a beautiful moment. For me, I think American kestrels are just so cool because they're red, white, and blue, which I think is amazing, and they're just aesthetically pleasing. They're like cute little hawks. I guess they're not hawks, but like cute little birds of prey, and how fun is that? I wish I could say something more deep than they're pretty.
They're pretty and they're cute and they're red, white, and blue and America and all that.
Yeah. But what about you? What about,
Exactly.
do you have one that immediately jumps to mind?
Yeah, I maybe like swallow-tailed kite, or
Yeah.
if size is an issue, maybe barn swallow. I mean, I something about that swallowtail and that graceful flight of both
Yeah.
those species is really appealing to me. And years ago, I had a dream, and the most vivid dream of flying, like right out my junior high school window, and I flew all over our town, and I wrote a song about it, and that's the song I play a lot at bird festivals when I go around and give talks and stuff.
Yeah.
And that was me flying as like a kite or a swallow, just soaring and like not having to flap at all. And it was the best dream I've ever had in my entire life. And it's still to this day I get goosebumps just thinking about that. So that is what I would love to transform into and fly like, and be
Yeah.
one of those graceful cutting through the air with the greatest of ease.
It's true. And isn't it funny when you see when you see birds that like really have a hard time flying? Like
Yeah,
I'll go to New England and vacation sometimes, and you have the common loons. Like
yeah,
seeing those things get off the water is painful. You know,
yeah,
it's but yeah, that is really beautiful to think of that, like what bird you would be. But
yeah. And what bird is Juliette Binoche? I mean, do we know?
she,
I was very interested in that passage in your book.
oh yeah, you know what? I've actually heard a couple of people that have read it have said, yeah, 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 birds are fine, but Juliette Binoche, and I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. She's one of these people that, um, I've been to various gatherings out here and other parts of the world where there are people that you recognize, and maybe, you know, um, maybe you're starstruck in some way, but I've never had that reaction the same way that I've had the reaction of like seeing, like whipping out my phone and I'm like taking a photograph of a bird, which is so crazy to say. I've physically bumped into, like A-list celebrities, and I'm like, oh, sorry, and they're like, oh, that's okay, and then you walk around and that's it, and then afterward you go, oh, that was so and so, oh, cool. So what are we having for dinner? Like it's that kind of thing.
Right.
But with
Right.
her, I think because when I was a kid, I'd seen her, or not even a kid, but just sort of younger, I'd seen her do various, I'd seen a couple of her movies, and I think she just radiates this sensuality, and she's definitely somebody who's just from another time,
Yep.
and that by standing still and just looking at something, she is in very watchable. You can't take our eyes off her, and I've of course you hear the jerks out here. They're like, really? They're like, that's your person? Like of all the people, and usually they get into the whole discussion of like, well, how old is she? And it's very condescending, and it's not even about
Yeah.
that. I think she's beautiful in person. Like I'm telling you, if you ever are lucky enough to cross paths with her, you will say, oh yeah, no, Ian was right. Um,
Yeah. Ian was right.
yeah, she was lovely, lovely. But
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Well,
did that answer your question at all?
that
Oh,
totally answered my question.
right.
That was perfect. Well, Ian, what a pleasure it's been to talk with you, and thank you so much for taking time out of your frantically busy schedule, both your career and your construction.
Thank you. Yes. Well, thank you so much, and we'll chat soon, Bill. Thanks for everything.
All right, take care, Ian.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The book is Odd Birds by Ian Harding, published by St. Martin's Press and available in bookstores everywhere. My thanks to Ian for speaking with us. He's as nice a person as he is a talented actor. And he even had a chat with BWD's events director, Emily Jones, who is a huge fan of Ian and Pretty Little Liars.
So cute.
Now we're all going to be fans of Ian. You can follow him at Instagram.com/Ian M. Harding. Thanks to our host, Birdwatchers Digest, for always being there for us. We just started celebrating our 40th year of publishing. Hard to believe. Get your read on at birdwatchersdigest-digital.com. Thanks too to Carl Zeiss, who makes superior optics for birders and nature lovers. Join the Zeiss community of birders at facebook.com/ZeissBirding. Welcome aboard to Cork Expeditions, the leader in polar adventures, offering unparalleled access to the most remote parts of the globe. Learn more at corkexpeditions.com. And finally, the American Birding Expo is the world of birding in one place. Join us this fall in Oaks, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia, and experience the birding lifestyle. Learn more at birdingexpo.com. That's it for this episode, folks. Subscribe to the RSS feed if you haven't already so you won't miss a single monthly episode. And please send us your comments. editor@birdwatchersdigest.com. That's me. Until next time, this is Bill Thompson III saying thanks for listening, and I'll see you out there with the birds. Laters.